This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Okay, so I've heard a lot about this conversation of should the Browns pursue or not pursue Ezekiel Elliott, former Ohio State running back, former longtime Cowboys running back, former top running back in the league. I have my thoughts on it, and I don't think the Browns should pursue it. But before I get into the reasons why I don't agree, I thought that it would be fair in this argument, not just to blanketly disagree and just give you all of my points on why I disagree, but to present that disagreement within the context of an argument for why the Browns should get Ezekiel Elliott. So I found this clip floating around on Twitter. It's from it's from the Dogs podcast. I think I've been on this show before, so I have no issues with any of the people on it. It's just a civil disagreement about whether the Browns should bring in Ezekiel Elliott. I'll let their clip speak for itself. I will be pausing to add extra commentary during the clip to say why I disagree with certain things that they're saying and certain things that they tweeted out in support of this argument.
Yeah, so whenever I saw this pop up, I mean, first of all, I just want to say that it seems like anytime anybody mentions anything about a running back going to the Cleveland Browns, Browns fans absolutely tweak. Like, they lose their minds. I saw so many people on Twitter saying, no, we're good. We got Chubb and Ford. Guys, we're not rolling into the season with two running backs. We are adding depth one way or another. And, I'm with Justin, like, for the money. I don't know what Zeke is looking for, but my gosh, he's still out there in free agency. Nobody's signed him yet. If we're able to get him at a pretty good price, why wouldn't you want to bring in as much talent onto this roster this year as possible? The Browns are clearly swinging for the fences this year.
So I'll agree that the Browns are clearly swinging for the fences, right? Like, the Browns are a team that are trying to win right now. And yes, the Browns are in talent accumulation mode. Bring in as much talent as possible. But that's, I think, where we run into the issue with Zeke Elliott. I don't think the disagreement about bringing in Zeke Elliott is that people don't want to add more talent to the running back room. The disagreement with people about bringing in Zeke Elliott is a question of whether he's still good or not, whether he's still useful, and whether the baggage that he's going to bring, not because he's a bad locker room guy or anything like that, and it's not what I'm applying, but when you are somebody who was a star player on the Cowboys, the NFL's most popular team, when you are somebody as famous as Ezekiel Elliott, when you are somebody who has carried the status of Ezekiel Elliott, you carry with you baggage that makes it hard for you to become a backup for multiple reasons, right? The thing about Jerome Ford is nobody's going to complain if Jerome Ford gets 5 carries in a game. If he gets 10 carries in a game, nobody's going to really care that much. It's not going to be a thing or a point of contention between the media and the coaching staff, or the fan base and the coaching staff. It's just not. But if Zeke Elliott's only getting 5 carries and things aren't getting right, then we're going to be sitting here complaining about it and not even asking ourselves the questions if Zeke Elliott is even good enough to garner those 5 or 10 carries that he gets a game. Like, that is the part of this conversation that I feel like has gone ignored. And I think we're leaning a lot on the memory of Ezekiel Elliott to justify a lot of these arguments, when on tape and some of the advanced numbers, they just don't support the image of Ezekiel Elliott that most of us have. Let's also be real. The Browns play in Cleveland, Ohio. A lot of Cleveland, Ohio roots for Ohio State. Ezekiel Elliott was one of the main figures of the last Ohio State team to win a national championship. He's a sentimental figure in this city for over 10 years. He did that as a sophomore in college in 2014. He's a sentimental figure here. People want to see Zeke on the Browns because they always wanted the Browns to have Ezekiel Elliott. Or people want somebody of the status that he carries socially on the Cleveland Browns because that means a positive association for the Browns. But I can't really find many great arguments to bring Zeke Elliott onto this team that are football related. And I think that's the issue that people have with bringing in Zeke Elliott. It's not that they don't think this team needs another running back or that they want to abandon the run completely. Sure, you have your outliers who say something like that, but most of the people who are willing to have a reasonable disagreement about this aren't saying that. It's a question of, is Zeke Elliott worth the baggage that he's going to bring in? And that goes far beyond what he's paid. It goes far beyond what role he's asked to play because Zeke Elliott is going to bring a presence. It's one of the reasons why you can't bring Cam Newton on to back up anybody in any team. And it's one of the things that Cam Newton's even aware of, why he released a list of teams that he's willing to back up for, because Cam brings with him baggage that is only really useful in specific situations, right? You can't bring Cam Newton into a situation where he doesn't have a great relationship with the starter, because just the presence of Cam is going to put pressure on almost any quarterback there, because not many backups in the NFL are former MVPs. You're asking Nick Chubb to split carries with somebody who's been a rushing leader. And it don't matter that Zeke ain't that anymore. This is not Madden. His status still matters. So it will matter the most to the fans. So when the Browns are running Zeke Elliott out there, and I think that's just one of the things that has gone forgotten in this conversation. Is Zeke Elliott still good enough to be your backup running back? I would argue probably, right, for most teams. Now, I don't know if it makes sense with the fit with the Cleveland Browns. I'll get into why that is later, but I really don't think he's a fit for this team for multiple reasons on the football field. But he's good enough to be somebody's backup. But the reason he's still out there is because he carries a lot of baggage. One, he probably doesn't want to take a minimum deal. He's Ezekiel Elliott, right? The same way that Odell Beckham held out until he got a deal that he felt like was more of the caliber of what he expected to get paid. It's the same way that Ezekiel Elliott ain't just about to play anywhere. Ain't just about to play for anything. Somebody, I think one of the guys here mentioned like a $1 million deal. That's very unrealistic for Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think Ezekiel Elliott is in free agency because he's willing to play for $1 million. So you're not going to get him cheap. If you do, and that's a big if, he comes with all the baggage of being Ezekiel Elliott. And you can argue that the Browns are in a decent place to handle that because Nick Chubb's there. Nick Chubb's used to splitting carries. But I also want to ask you this question. In the audience that thinks it's a good idea to bring in Zeke Elliott, would you rather just have Nick Chubb take 85% of the carries this year? Or would you rather have Nick Chubb split 65-35 with Zeke Elliott? I know I would rather have. I think giving Nick Chubb the extra 6 carries a game is just better for the team overall. I think Nick Chubb will be fine enough as a pass blocker. He's not shown himself to be a disaster in that front. A work in progress, but not a disaster. And as a receiver, even though it gets talked about as if Nick Chubb's a disaster in that front, he's not. He's just not the most capable receiver out there, which is fine. We're not asking him to do that much as a receiver. So I think this whole conversation is overblown, but let's continue his argument.
Zeke fits for me, though, if the Browns were to do this, is mostly in the third down passing game. He's a good pass receiving back, and he's a great pass blocker. His pass pro is awesome. He was great in college, great coming into the pros. I I just looked up some stats because I was curious as to like how good is he at his pass blocking. His pass blocking efficiency grade last year was 97.8. That was third overall amongst all the running backs in the league. He had 52 pass blocking snaps. He allowed only 2 pressures, no hits on the quarterback, no sacks. So, I mean, on obvious passing downs, Zeke would be a huge asset in the backfield.
Okay, so one, we're talking about having a player on the field that carries the baggage that Ezekiel Elliott does for 55 snaps, I think was his pass block sets. So for limited snaps, you're talking about having a player who's probably going to command a lot more than the minimum, who's going to command you split some carries because Zeke Elliott's not going to come on this team to be basically a third string or second string running back, third string when it comes to carries. So he's going to want to split some of these carries. We've seen that he's been diminished as a running back over the last couple of years, but he is a good pass protector. And even that's kind of come into question because what he said is true. He does have a decent pass block efficiency number, but that's something that can be kind of manipulated. And one of the things that I think Pro Football Focus does do a good job with is kind of laying out some of these charts so you know or have a better idea of what guys are doing in what situations. And here they have an interesting chart, if I can put it up on screen for y'all, where you can look at who were the guys who took the most true pass block sets and just regular pass block sets. And you can see Ezekiel Elliott is actually 26, according to Pro Football Focus. When it came to pass block sets, they said he took 47 of them, and he had a percentage of like 16%, and he graded out at 61, which is fine. What I'm more interested in is his true pass set numbers. Now, true pass sets exclude any plays with less than 4 rushers, so plays where they weren't even attempting to get to the quarterback, play action, screens, short dropbacks, and time to throws under 2 seconds. So anything where pass protection would be pretty irrelevant, they throw out. When it comes to that, all of a sudden, these numbers get a lot worse, right? He has 19 true pass block sets. He had a grade of 54.5, and he gave up, 2 pressures and 2 hurries with an efficiency of 94. So, yes, the efficiency, and you say efficiency, and that makes it sound good, but the numbers weren't good for Ezekiel Elliott. He did not grade out as a good pass blocker. Again, this is where the memory of Zeke Elliott fights with the reality of who he is today. He is not the Zeke Elliott that we remember when it comes to being a receiver out the backfield. The Zeke Elliott we remember was a beast out the backfield as a receiver, right? Quick ability to accelerate, just the dog on slit screens. That's not who Zeke is anymore, though. You look at his passing grades, they're horrible. 41.4. I think that's even worse than Nick Chubb. So we're talking about a guy who's on the team to be a third down option. Now, if he's true third down and Nick Chubb's true starter and we're not splitting carries anymore, we're talking about an 80, 85% split of the run carries. So you're talking about a guy who's going to get maybe 20 to 15% of the touches, and I think that's probably a good place. If you want to give him more, I think that makes the argument even stronger to why you shouldn't do this, because he's not better than a tired Nick Chubb at this point. And you can make the argument that him and Jerome Ford are about the same because he's put up pretty pedestrian run numbers last year. But his receiving is not good. He's not been a good receiver out the backfield the last couple of years, and especially last year. He's not been the same level of pass protector that he's been in years past. I would say he's not as bad as the efficiency numbers say he is as pass protection, but he's certainly not that much better than average anymore. Like, the brand of Zeke Elliott makes you feel like he should be better at those two things, but the reality of Zeke Elliott is that he's not better at those two things. He's approaching the age where most running backs tend to fall off a cliff. And you can make the argument that Nick Chubb is approaching that age. He'll be that age in a year or two, but he has shown more evidence of degradation over the last few years than Nick Chubb has. So there's a much stronger element there for him. I just don't see how this benefits the team in any way to have a third down back on the team that's going to bring in baggage because of his status, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Maybe it's nothing. But that's not how Kevin Stefanski or the coaching staff tend to approach that kind of thing. But still, nonetheless. So you're bringing in a dude in Zeke Elliott who more than likely you're not getting away with paying him $1 million. Like, I don't know of any player the status of Ezekiel Elliott that just accepts the vet minimum, right? Like, that doesn't happen very often. And there's nothing to suggest that he's willing to take an offer that low. So if you're not going to pay him almost about like the vet minimum, basically, then you're paying probably $8 million, $6 million for Zeke to pass protect and be a receiver out the backfield. And I'm not convinced that Nick Chubb couldn't do a better job doing those two things, or that Jerome Ford couldn't do the same job and he's already on the roster. This team is not going to be one that needs 3 running backs active on game days. They're not going to be one that is going to be running the ball to the point to justify that. So I think the argument for Zeke just isn't that strong. The pass blocking numbers that you would use to make an argument for him don't hold up. The reception numbers for him just don't hold up anymore. That's just not indicative of the player he is. So he's not a good third down back. And he did not play that role in Dallas. And it's important to remember, they were desperate to keep Zeke Elliott in Dallas because Jerry Jones is very loyal. If Jerry Jones and that Cowboy staff thought he could be a third down back, he would have done it. He did not do it, right? Like, Tony Pollard was still the third down back in Dallas because Tony Pollard was better at all those things. So I think this is one of those times where we catch ourselves wanting a big name because the big name is sexy, right? And it's not just that Zeke went to Ohio State. There's a lot of players that go to Ohio State the fans don't want here. But it is a factor, right? Zeke's a legend here in Ohio. He's been a legend in the NFL. He's a huge name. And getting him would feel like a huge day or a huge deal. The same way that, the Ravens got Odell Beckham at 30, and that feels like a huge deal for them. ESPN will talk about it. It will make waves through the media. But the most impactful day I would fear that Ezekiel Elliott would have as a Cleveland Brown would be the day he signs the contract and that's it, because I don't think he'd be very useful for this team on the football field. And I'm not convinced that there's an argument out there that can significantly move me because I've not heard it. If the argument is taking to me a third down back, he's not good at those things anymore. If the argument is that you need somebody to split carries with Nick Chubb, then what did we spend the whole summer adding all of these wide receivers on the team for? Paying Deshaun Watson if we're going to run the same offense that we had with Baker Mayfield and Jacoby Brissett. Makes no sense. You pay that much money for a quarterback, that's because you plan to drastically change how you going about offense. So, no, it doesn't make sense. There's not really an angle where it does make sense. Sentimentally, it makes sense. To a lot of people, it'd be cool. Like, I would do it on Madden, but this ain't Madden. Can't just add somebody like Ezekiel Elliott, tell him to pass block, and think he's going to be cool with it for $1 million. That's not how Zeke's thinking. Zeke don't think he's cooked. Zeke wants to play and start for somebody, and Zeke probably wants to make about $8 million this year. Will he be able to do any of those things? No, but I think he's willing to wait until somebody gets hurt and somebody's desperate enough to start him to sign somewhere versus take this pass blocking hypothetical role that he's just not going to take. And even then, it don't make sense because he's not as good at those things as we assume because he's Ezekiel Elliott. He just hasn't been. And he's been declining for a couple of years now. So, and also he's a fumble machine. Like, we forget he fumbles a lot. The one thing you don't want your backup running back doing is fumbling. And what we know about Zeke, like all the good things about Zeke be fumbling. I just don't think it makes much sense. He's not a good fit as a backup running back. He's not a good fit as a third down running back. And he's not better than Nick Chubb, so he makes no sense to start. The team that he goes to will be a team that wants to start Ezekiel Elliott because that's the only team that makes sense for Ezekiel Elliott. You can't necessarily just bring Ezekiel Elliott on your team to be the backup. Same reason why Cam Newton can't be a backup. I mentioned this earlier, but Cam can only play somewhere that wants him to start. He can't be a backup. He's too big of a deal to be a backup. And coaches care about that because they got to answer the questions. Why isn't Zeke getting that? Is Zeke happy doing this? They're not going to want to answer those questions about a guy that they're planning on giving maybe 10 snaps a game. It just doesn't make sense. But that's my thoughts. So let me know your thoughts on it. Do you want Ezekiel Elliott in Cleveland? Do you think it would make sense on the football field for the Cleveland Browns? Let me know in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day.